say, so little time. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol. She said, I've come a long way, so I should do the whole speech. I want to begin by congratulating Andre, Andrea, and Allison on their induction in the New York University Sport Hall of Fame. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this evening. I am so very pleased to have family members here. I'm also grateful to my longtime friends and New York colleagues who are also here tonight. For me, induction in New York Sport Hall of Fame is unimaginable, unanticipated, yet very much appreciated. I am flattered to be included with the very distinguished athletes, coaches, administrators, and builders already in the hall, as well as many whom I am pretty certain will be inducted in the years ahead. I feel very fortunate to have been able to contribute to sport at York in various ways during my several decades with the university. Those who know me know about my passion for sport, physical activity, and campus life in general, through so many involvements in my undergraduate days and my early years working at York. Those who know me also know that I bleed a much redder York red than almost anyone else. Although I may get some disagreement from the likes of Sheila Forshaw, Bart Semanek, and a few others in this room tonight. There are so many people whom I would like to thank. Those who have given me encouragement, imparted their knowledge and insight, shared their friendship, and provided me with opportunities for a 40-year career at the university and a long association with York's sport program. I had told my daughter Lauren that I was a bit stressed about my speech for tonight because I didn't know what to talk about. She said, "Dad, tell stories. You know more stories about York than anyone else." Well, Lauren, you have not spent an evening in conversation with Ian MacDonald. I do plan to share a few stories about team and leadership from my perspective, and certainly give credit where it belongs. But first, a bit about how I ever got involved. For me, it all started shooting hoops in Tate's main gym between classes in my first year back in 1969, and ongoing confrontations with a caretaker, Arante Del Monte, who seemed to be bothered whenever he saw that I was the only person using the gym. Then came the hours, days, and weeks in the squash courts, involvement in inter-college sports, the thrill of attending hockey, football, and basketball matches against U of T, and the forging of friendships with many varsity athletes and phys ed majors who all seemed to gravitate to my college, STOM. By the end of my undergraduate days, I had developed a personal attachment to the Tate McKenzie Center and the Ice Palace, and more than a curiosity about the Department of Physical Education and Athletics. My job at STOM College during the 1970s and my extracurriculars put me in contact with many of York's coaches, mostly Carol Wilson, Eric Willis, and Mike Dinning, but also Bob Bain, Wally Diva, Byron McDonald, Kevin Jones, Pat Murray, Dave Chambers, Frank Cosentino, Dave Pickett, Francis Flint, Marina Van Merber, and Tom Civic. My involvements in sport began to intensify as I was regularly asked by Navi Rukowski and Arvo Titus to help with this or that in the men's varsity and inter-college programs. As well, I had stepped up to take a lead in the increasingly popular Summer Slow Pitch League, and then in York's first homecoming in 1978. When I became the university's alumni officer in 1979, I thought it both important and strategic to foster an alumni program based on the colleges and the Department of Physical Education and Athletics, the areas where I knew there was the greatest affinity to York University. We had initiated an annual homecoming the previous year, and in 1980 we established this York University Sport Hall of Fame. Of course, none of these things would have happened without the incredible support that we had from York's president of the day, Ian MacDonald. He recognized the importance of alumni, of creating traditions and the foundational building blocks that needed to be put in place. This was significant for a fledgling university, one that had struggled with earlier attempts to create an alumni program. During his term, Ian and his wife Dorothy attended every homecoming, appearing at as many events as possible, sometimes 15 in a day, and the annual Sport Hall of Fame induction dinner. Through the years, they have continued to frequent alumni events, and I am delighted that they are here this evening. Thank you, Ian, for your trust, for your vision and leadership in setting New York on the right course with our alumni program, and to you and Dorothy for your unwavering support. The idea of a Sport Hall of Fame was actually a suggestion that Dr. Frank Cosentino gave me. He was the chair and director of physical education and athletics in 1980. At the time, I thought New York was too young for such a thing. But Carol Wilson, who had stepped forward to help create an alumni organization of varsity athletes, thought we should do it. And so we did, with the help of Frank, Mary Lyons, who was women's athletics coordinator, and an enthusiastic core of alumni volunteer leaders, which in those years included George Skeen, Sean Renahan, Candace Brown, Candy will always be Candy Miller, okay, Candace Brown, Chris Koska, Bruce Matheson, Ev Spence, and Marilyn Payne. George and Candace are both here this evening, as are, I am delighted to say, Eva Langley, Debbie Lamb, the gymnastics guys, and so many others who have been loyal to the Hall and this event over the years. George, I remember you emceeing the first Hall of Fame induction dinner in October 1980. And Jamie Laws, you were always there. I remember you also emceeing one of the induction events back in the 80s. Dr. Stuart Robbins, who succeeded Frank Cosentino as chair and director of physical education and athletics, was also a strong and active supporter of the Hall of Fame and participant in varsity alumni activities during those early years. When we embarked on the Hall of Fame, historical records were a bit of a challenge. Mary Lyons, of course, had impeccable records for the women's program, but the men's program, not so much. Thankfully, there was the OUAA office, the CIAU record book, and Larry Nanskabel. He had coached 10 or 12 different men's sports teams during New York's early years in the 60s and 70s before heading off to build the Ontario Rugby Union. Larry, I am absolutely thrilled that you were here tonight. After 10 years in alumni and fundraising work at York through the 1980s, I became executive officer in the Department of Physical Education, Recreation, and Athletics, which soon after would become the School of Physical Education, and then several years later, the School of Kinesiology and Health Science. By the early 1990s, there were significant pressures on the sport facilities in the Tate McKenzie Center. We argued long and hard with senior administration for facility expansion, and but to no avail because of the university's financial situation and the always overarching principle that academic money should not be used to finance sport and recreation. When I say we, it was Stu Robbins, the chair of the department, Mike Dinnigan, who had become the director of sport and recreation, and me. We would soon come up with a proposal on our own financing plan to build a sports bubble to provide the much-needed program space. Our proposal piqued the interest of then Provost Beth Hopkins and others in the senior administration. But Peter Struck, who was in charge of facilities, physical plans, and business operations, said, and I quote, "There isn't going to be any inflatable balloon in the middle of my campus." That was actually a defining moment as Peter Struck would begin to emerge as what Tom Zivik would call a champion for sport and recreation. To avoid any notion of a sports bubble, Peter quickly came up with an alternate scheme to build an extension on the Tate McKenzie Center for a little more than double the cost of the sports bubble, We were told to revise our financing plan accordingly, and I was delegated to represent the School of Physical Education on the project committee. Supported, of course, by a great team within the school, including Stu, Mike, Mary Lyons, Pat Murray, who at the time was transitioning the two coordinators of men's and women's into one position, Tom Hodgson from our operations group, and David DeMonte from recreation. With the leadership of Beth Hawkins, Peter Struck, and Tahir Mohammed, Peter's director of construction, the York Student Fieldhouse was completed in 6 months. And shortly after we opened the York Student Fieldhouse in January 1994, the university engaged in discussions with a proponent who wanted to lease a parcel of university land to build a multiple rink arena complex. At the same time, Mike Dinning and Pat Murray had been lobbying hard with Beth Hawkins, Peter Struck, and others in senior management to come up with a means to build a modest football stadium on campus. Through the late 1980s and early 1990s, York played its home football games at Esther Steiner Stadium over on Bathurst Street. And I think Andre talked about that a little bit. Sheldon Levy, York's Vice President of Institutional Affairs, which was essentially all things non-academic, was another emerging champion for sport and recreation. He saw both the arena complex initiative and the building of a modest stadium on campus as opportunities to advance the needs of varsity sport, the university's profile, and our ability to recruit and be competitive. Peter Struck put together a plan to construct a high-quality natural turf football field with 2,000 bleacher seats to be financed within his business operations group. We even had exploratory discussions about a long-term soft beverage contract that might generate the money needed for the football field and the stadium fieldhouse. Sheldon also arranged for us to be at the table with the York University Development Corporation and Loredon, the arena sports complex proponent, to integrate the needs of sport and recreation into the land lease agreement for the Ice Gardens complex. Well, as things would evolve in 1995, Mike Dinning decided to leave York for Simon Fraser University. Stu Robbins would take his scheduled sabbatical, and Beth Hopkins would conclude her term as provost. This left me, Carol Wilson, who had been cajoled into who stepped up courageously to serve as and Pat Murray, suddenly promoted to interim director, to see these significant projects through to completion. And we did. Thanks to the continuing support of Sheldon, Peter, and his team, our varsity coaches, and our operations and admin staff. Our football team would play its home opener on campus in September 1995 in what Andre, Coach Tom Arnott, and the boys would dub their Field of Dreams. And our varsity hockey teams would move into the 6-rink Ice Gardens with its 1,700-seat competition arena the following September. A year thereafter, Pat Murray would be confirmed as permanent director of sport and recreation. Pat would be the significant impetus in the execution of that long-term soft beverage contract and the construction of the stadium fieldhouse, working with Phyllis Clark, who had become the Vice President of Finance and Administration after Sheldon had left York, members of her finance team, and Peter Struck, Tahir Mohammed, and their team in facilities in the business operations group. It was with the support of Phyllis Clark and President Lauren Marsden that Pat Murray pushed to reestablish the Sport Hall of Fame induction event in 2001 after a hiatus of more than a decade. We honored 10 inductees that year in an effort to catch up for lost time, and we have never looked back. Thank you, Pat. In that same year, 2001, Pat and I developed a financing plan to expand Kate McKenzie again, to double the size of the fitness center and centralize frontline services. But we couldn't get immediate traction with senior administration, largely because of institutional pressures brought on by the double cohort, enrollment growth planning, and the construction of new academic buildings. But shortly after Gary Brewer became Vice President of Finance and Administration in 2002, and he lured me to join his staff, he came into my office one day and said, "Do you still have that financing plan for the Tate McKenzie fitness expansion? I need you to dust it off, run your numbers by Treasury, and get the folks in sport and rec mobilized." I suspected he already had the support of President Lauren Marsden and Vice President of Students Bonnie Newman. Gary, where is he? Gary? Folks, he has a much better personality and sense of humor than his title would suggest. Gary would be another champion over the next decade, supporting and funding the repatriation and upgrading of space and amenities in Cape Mackenzie, creating a sport and rec facilities renewal fund, seizing the opportunity to install artificial turf in the stadium, and providing leadership for the Para-Pan Am Athletics Stadium. York was not well positioned in Toronto's Pan Am bid proposal. But once Toronto was awarded the Games, Gary and Patrick Monahan, our former Vice President Academic and Provost, decided that York should position itself to be a backup venue for the major competition facilities for the Games, should any of the site proponents withdraw. Key players in this were also Bud Purvis, President of the York University Development Corporation, and President Mahmoud Shukri, who took the lead in approaching the province in Toronto 2015. They would turn to York when the city of Hamilton failed to commit to the athletic stadium, and we were ready. And so construction of a world-class sport venue in the heart of our campus is now nearing completion. What remains exciting is the significant opportunity for this facility to enhance sport and recreation programming for York students in the years following the Para-Pan Am Games. And Jen Myers, who has been involved in this pretty much from the beginning, is all over it. So enough of my stories. Claire Drake, the great inter-university hockey coach from the University of Alberta, is well known to have profoundly said, "It's amazing what can be accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit." Throughout my 4 years working in various roles at York, I was fortunate to have had opportunities to be an influencer, facilitator, strategist, technician, and as required, a leader in advancing sport and varsity-related initiatives. In most cases, I was just a member of the team, carrying out my role for the good of York and its students. As Ian MacDonald has often said, we didn't need it written in a job description, we just did what needed to be done. In initiating Homecoming, the Sport Hall of Fame, the Varsity Alumni Concept, the Awards and Scholarships Program, in bringing about new facilities like the Field House, the stadium, the ice gardens, the fitness expansion, and whatever else it says in your program, I suppose I have been a common denominator, or at least a common factor. It is in this context, with pride in all of my various teammates in all of these initiatives over the years, pride in York University, and with the utmost of appreciation and humility that I accept this honor tonight. Thank you. I wish you a very enjoyable evening.